Welcome back. We're here to make a video about common misconceptions about Peru.
Yep.
We have a lot of friends and family that ask us questions about safety and things like that, so we have compiled a list, and we'll just get right to it.
Absolutely. So the first thing we want to talk about is the misconception that Peru is predominantly a rural country where people live in huts or houses made out of mud. So I think the best place to start would be to say that the urban population in Peru is actually comparable to the United States. So the United States has an urban population of 81.5%, and Peru's urban population is 78.5%. So it's very comparable with the United States.
The biggest city here is Lima. It's the capital.
Yep.
It is comparable in population and in mass, like size, to Chicago, Illinois.
Yep.
Which is obviously a very sizable place.
Absolutely.
37% of the total population of Peru lives in Lima.
Yeah. The population of Lima is 12.1 million. Compare that to the city that we live in, Arequipa, which is about almost 1 million people total in the metro area. It's 990,000 people, or 3% of the entire population of the country. So compared to Lima, it's very small.
Although, I will say, for our Wisconsin friends and family,
Right.
Arequipa, where we're living now, is about the size of Milwaukee.
Right.
So it's not small.
Right.
It's just a lot smaller than
Right.
Lima.
Right. Lima is definitely the predominant city. And then another city for comparison up in the north, the third largest metropolitan area is Trujillo, and that has a population of about 935,000 people. So a little smaller than Arequipa, but just gives you an idea. There are large cities in Peru. Not every place, not every community in Peru is kind of this idyllic tiny mountain town that a lot of people think of. Regionally, across Latin America, there are countries that are actually much more urbanized even than Peru. Migration into cities away from rural areas is kind of a trend across the region.
So this next one is pretty similar to the first one. It's that Peru is an ugly country and all of the areas are poor or in poverty. So there is poverty, of course, but there is poverty in the U.S. as well. So, for example, there is a fair amount of homeless population here in Peru. There's about 5.5% of Peruvians that are homeless, whereas the United States has about 0.2%.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to extreme poverty, and this is folks who are living on less than $3.50 a day, Peru has about 9.7% of the population in extreme poverty. In the United States, comparatively, that's less than 0.1%. So when it comes to extreme poverty, there's a case to be made. However, the trend is, again, poverty is dramatically decreasing in Peru across the country. We've also been really lucky to travel around the region, and can safely say that Peru is one of the most beautiful places that we've been. I think that's really, really easy to say.
Yeah.
The landscapes and everything that comes with that are so stark and so striking and beautiful. To say that Peru is an ugly place is honestly pretty absurd.
Yeah. And again, like any country, there's rich areas and there's poor areas. It just depends on where you go.
Yep.
But most public places are well maintained, and
Yep.
The number of better income areas are increasing.
Yep.
The next common misconception that we're addressing is that Peru is a third world country. Now, my anthropology professor would have some problems with that terminology, but we'll go with it. The city of Lima has socioeconomic indicators not unlike many U.S. cities. Peru's economy is one of the fastest growing in the entire region, and their growth is at between 4 and 7% per year.
Peru is also known to be one of the most economically and politically stable countries in the region. Now, a lot of people in Peru might laugh at me right now when I say that because of what's been going on recently, but every country's got ups and downs, every country's got its instability, and so, I think it's pretty easy to say that Peru has been a very stable place in the most recent decades, politically and economically.
So the next misconception is that Peru is dangerous and full of drug-related violence.
Right. So when it comes to violent crime, Peru is actually not the most dangerous country in the region by a long shot. So compared to the United States, in for example, homicide rates for every 100,000 citizens, Peru is at about 7.16. Compare that to the United States, which is 4.88. It's in the same neighborhood. But then when you break that down into cities or regions, it begins to be a very different picture. So, for example, the state of Louisiana is 11.8. Missouri is 8.8. So those are both more than the country of Peru.
And when you do cities, like I said earlier, Chicago and Lima are pretty comparable in population and size.
Right.
Chicago's rate is 23.8, and Lima is 5.
Right. So there's a dramatic difference in violent crime between cities like Chicago and Lima.
Right.
And when you look at it regionally, Peru becomes a very shining example when it comes to violent crime rates. So again, Peru's rate is 7.1%, compared to Brazil at 26.7, Mexico at 16.3, Bolivia even at 12.4, Venezuela at 57.1, and this is something that's happened recently, and it's a big regional kind of crisis. But then to top it off is El Salvador at 108.64. So you can tell that when it comes to violent crime, Peru is a very, very safe place. But then another fun one to compare Peru and the United States particularly is in incarceration rates. So in Peru, your incarceration rate is about 251 people for every 100,000, whereas in the United States, which is the highest in the world, is 666 people per 100,000.
So the next topic kind of goes along with violence, although it's not violence. It's about street harassment. So there's a lot of street harassment in Peru, is the misconception.
Right.
So as a woman, when I think of street harassment, I think of men catcalling you, making advances, things like this. Mm-hmm. And our experience thus far is that's not the case.
Yeah, not really. I think you do see that occasionally, but honestly, I've seen it more in the United States than I have here.
For sure.
But when it comes to the closest definition of street harassment, I would identify would be in vendors in the street, particularly when it comes to services for tourists. And so, it's very hard for us with kind of the presentation that we have as folks that are not from here.
Gringos.
Right. We're constantly approached as tourists. And that can be frustrating, but at the same time, I don't ever feel unsafe or...
No, that being said, I don't feel unsafe either, but sometimes they can get slightly aggressive, especially
Right.
taxi drivers.
Right.
Like if you're exiting an airport or something
Right.
like this, they'll try to stand in your way or something like that. But
Right.
it's not...
It's not physically threatening.
No. So the next misconception is that the only thing to do in Peru is go to Machu Picchu.
Ha. So there are a venerable boatload of things to do in Peru all across the country.
And things for everyone. I think
Absolutely.
we've kind of touched on this in a few other videos, but we'll give you a good list.
Absolutely. So, yes, Machu Picchu's a thing.
And yes, it's cool.
And yes, it's cool. And if you come to Peru, you should definitely see it. However, there are lots of other things to do. I think one of my favorite things beyond Machu Picchu that I've experienced here is Lake Titicaca. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's very peaceful. It's very different. Very unique place. And so that's one that sticks out in my mind. Very close to home here in Arequipa is the Coca Canyon, which is one of the deepest canyons in the world. In the canyon, some of the largest birds in the world fly around. The Pacific condor. It's a very unique place. It's a beautiful valley up river from there, and it's about 2 or 3 hours from Arequipa. It's a gorgeous place.
There's also a ton of hiking.
Absolutely.
So most of these we haven't done, but it's on our list. So the Rainbow Mountains, it's on our list for this year.
Mm-hmm.
Looks amazing. Google it,
Yep.
Pinterest it.
Yep.
It looks awesome. What else?
The Cordillera Blanca, which is kind of in the middle of the country, is the national park that encompasses the tallest peaks in Peru. And there's lagoons and trails and tons of really beautiful things up and around that region. And then also near to Machu Picchu is kind of a newer site called Choqquequirao, and it is a more recent find, and I believe they're still excavating it, and the plan is to open that as a full attraction in the coming years. It's a gorgeous view. It's a very it's both similar and very dissimilar from Machu Picchu, but it's kind of along the same routes as an outpost of the Inca.
And it's bigger than Machu Picchu, so I think that once they get it all opened, it'll be a big draw.
Yep. And also Paracas, and that is a marine reserve where there is a rather sizable colony of sea lions. Something that we want to probably check out this year if we can. It's just south of Lima in Ica province, I believe.
But disclaimer, we haven't been there yet.
Right.
But sea lions can be kind of nasty.
They can be aggressive.
If you're going, don't like go up and pet them.
Yeah, they're not for petting. Off the Gringo Trail in northern Peru are several cities and sites that are really something to see. So, again, as we mentioned before, the city of Trujillo is in the north, on the northern coast, and it's a sizable population. And around there is kind of wine country and a lot of pre-Inca temples and old civilizations and ruins to check out and hike around in, and also beaches. So along the northern coast is Piura and Mancora, which is a site that folks here have been telling us that we got to go check out for the beaches and kind of have a beach bum day. So,
right. Also, Peru has the Amazon jungle,
right?
Which is no small thing.
Right.
One of the main cities is Iquitos. You can get there only by plane, so it's pretty isolated, but we're told it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And Iquitos, just fun fact, is one of the last major population centers that you can reach coming from the Atlantic Ocean up the Amazon. So it's a very isolated place. But also in the south of the country, in Madre de Dios, is Manu National Park, and it's a huge expanse, a huge reserve with animals and lots of biodiversity. And then also in Madre de Dios is Puerto Maldonado, which is kind of the jungle tour for folks who are in the vicinity of Cusco. It's kind of accessible from there. It's quite far from there, but it's one of the more accessible places.
Next, for the city people like me, we have Lima.
Right.
Obviously, we've talked a lot about that, about the size of Chicago. It's a super cool city on the Pacific Ocean.
Lots to do.
Nightlife, museums.
Yeah.
There's
Food.
just tons of stuff.
Absolutely.
I love Lima.
Right.
Climate kind of sucks, but it's a good city.
And, when it comes to urban populations and urban centers to visit, Arequipa is a great one. Cusco is another great one. They're all very, very unique from each other, very distinct. And Tacna, which is kind of another one that a lot of folks are going to meet when they're kind of redoing their visa, heading out to Chile or on their way to Chile, for example. But it's they're all very unique, and they've all got their own special charm. Another misconception about Peru is that no one speaks English. And this is particularly fun for us because we run into English speakers pretty often. So the percentage of non-Spanish speakers is kind of interesting too. So 13.2% of the people in Peru speak Quechua. It's their first language. Quechua is one of the primary native languages in Peru. And another native language is Aymara, and almost 2% of the people speak only Aymara. Pretty much the rest of everybody else speaks Spanish
as the first language.
As their first language. And when it comes to Arequipa, it's pretty interesting. There's a quite sizable population of French speakers.
Right. So, James, come visit. You'll be set on both English and Spanish.
It's true. It's true.
So, we couldn't find a lot of good numbers about the percentage of people that spoke English as a second language here, but you run into English speakers all the time.
Right.
Tourism is a big industry in Peru, so people go to school for tourism, to be a tour guide or something like that, so they're trained to speak English for all the tourists.
Right. And more than half of everyone who speaks English in the country got their primary exposure to English through secondary school or through high school.
Right.
Another fun misconception is that there is no internet. But if that was true, how do we upload this video?
So I'll link our vlog about getting internet in the description box below.
Such an adventure.
But there's internet available. There's cafes and restaurants that have internet service, although it is sometimes hard to find fast internet or something sufficient if you are doing some heavy internet work. Right. But most hotels, and if you stay in Airbnb or if you have friends that live here that have home internet, most of that internet's going to be on par with the U.S.
Absolutely. For homeowners and renters, for example, it's fairly easy to get reliable service from all the major telecoms in Peru, and it's extremely reasonable price. I think that it's safe to say that it's about 50% of what we paid in the United States for home broadband, so it's very reasonable.
Yep. The next common misconception is that you need to watch out for malaria in Peru. That is true for the jungle regions of the country, but a lot of the country is not jungle. Right. So a lot of the country, including where major cities are high altitude zones, and malaria-carrying mosquitoes can't go there.
Right. But you should always listen to your doctor. So if they give you advice about taking malaria medication, I would listen to them. So another misconception about Peru is that it's all a jungle. Like if you watch the Disney movie, what is it, Emperor's New Groove, everything's a jungle. It's not really the case. Yes, Peru is about half or a little bit more a jungle, but the rest of it, where kind of all the action is, if you will, is a very diverse landscape. So, for example, one of the most predominant landscapes around Arequipa is the desert, one of the driest deserts in the world. Another kind of version of desert is Chaparral, and this is kind of the area that predominates around Lima. So anything west of the Andes is going to be very, very dry, nothing like a jungle whatsoever.
There are also high plains, plenty of cities. There are coastal cliffs. We have tropical beaches, mountains, obviously. Mm-hmm.
And, also there's a lot of high-altitude valleys where a lot of agricultural activity takes place. Again, not representing a jungle whatsoever. But yes, the jungle. The jungle is huge. Peru has some of the most undisturbed land area in the Amazon jungle and boasts some of the most impressive biodiversity on the planet.
Okay, we're getting close to the end.
Yep.
The next misconception is that there is no vegetarian food in Peru. I'm a vegetarian, and I live here.
Yeah.
Although, that being said, sometimes it is difficult and challenging. I have had to make some strange meals, some combos, but it's growing.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's growing, and right along with the rest of the region. So it's estimated that in Brazil, about 8% of the population is vegetarian, whereas Peru, for example, is between 5 and 7% vegetarian.
And this is just speaking from experience, but we spent a lot of time in Peru in 2012, and Clint did in 2009, and it was real hard.
Yeah, it was practically non-existent in 2009.
Right, and we were in the city of Lima, which is bigger and a little more progressive.
Advanced, right.
But it's gotten a whole lot better from my standpoint, anyway.
Absolutely. So vegetarian has a reputation in Peru as being a more healthy diet. You see signs in all the vegetarian restaurants talking about how healthy it is. So there's definitely a perception that eating vegetarian is significantly more healthy than kind of the average or the typical diet here in the country.
Right. The last one. Peruvian food is like Mexican food.
Whoever says this doesn't know anything about Mexican food or Peruvian food.
They are mistaken.
Yes.
So, it's really difficult to find good Mexican food in Peru.
It's true. It's true.
So, Peruvian cuisine is actually among some of the world's best, sometimes ranking higher than Mexican food.
Yeah, absolutely. So, culinary influences in Peru from history and from the mix of cultures are distinctly different from Mexico. And other countries in the region as well. There's almost no overlap when it comes to kind of the flagship cuisine in either Mexican or Peruvian food.
Right. Peruvian food is mostly based around various preparations of potatoes.
This is where potatoes came from.
Right. So Mexican food is obviously based around corn.
Which is where corn came from. So
they're very different.
Yeah, there are very few overlapping influences between Peruvian and Mexican food. Which one's better? I guess we'll have to wait for another episode of the Fantastic Expedition to have that answered.
So those are all the misconceptions we have. Again, these are things that friends and family have asked us about.
Mm-hmm. If you have any questions about Peru, any conceptions you want to have either confirmed or patted down, let us know.
Right. So that's it. That's all we have. So we'll catch you in the next video.